Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
And good Friday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with the National Weather Service. It is the 27th of December. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date on the latest weather happenings all around Alaska. You can do that easily by looking at weather.gov and clicking on Alaska, or look at the entire state at once by heading to arh.noaa.gov. And there's lots of other ways to get your weather information while you're on the go. If you like to use the phone, of course, 800-472-0391. You can stay up to date on your mobile device or your phone by using Twitter, NWS Fairbanks, NWS Juneau, or NWS Anchorage, all broadcasting information on Twitter, on Facebook under U.S. National Weather Service Alaska, and in the afternoon especially, and along with many other features, you can certainly get a mid-afternoon brief of statewide weather by searching NWS Anchorage on YouTube, and then following this broadcast in the evening, you can watch the entire broadcast of Alaska Weather via our broadcast partners, alaskapublic.org, or you can search for AKWX-TV on YouTube to find those complete broadcasts there. Here's a picture from Shishmaref from our friend Eskimo Fixer on Instagram, another way that we're always trying to keep up to date with what's going on out in the world of Alaska there. Dennis Davis sent this picture there from the flag as we wrap up the year, and it looks like a little bit of sunlight made it to Shishmaref this afternoon. So a beautiful day there, it looks like. A little bit of cold and wind, of course, but there's a look at Shishmaref this afternoon. Thank you very much, Dennis, or Eskimo Fixer as it was. Hazardous weather across the state. Well, we still have wind chill advisories and winter weather advisories for wind chill across the interior, mainly along the summits there for kind of a feels-like index of about 45 below in some cases. They're mainly along the summits again. Temperatures themselves around this area have been even colder than that, so we're mainly focused on some of the higher terrain. Also, wind chill advisories for the Arctic coast. Looking at values that could drop to 50 or 55 below through the majority of the weekend there. Some improvements may be seen across the eastern coast as we head into Sunday there. So if you are in those areas, be advised it's cold and could be even colder if you're exposed to some of that wind. So be extra careful. Out across the western Pacific and western Bering Sea, you can see a pretty healthy gyre here south of the Kamchatka Peninsula. Our current weather maker that's going to affect most of the southern third of Alaska is sitting just south of Unalaska at this point. This storm is going to pump up a lot of moisture across the far western sections of the Bering Sea. So as we look ahead in time, we'll see some of those impacts on the western Bering, and stronger winds already beginning to show up in the forecast for the western Aleutians by the end of the weekend. But as far as direct impacts from this over the weekend, probably not too far away. Here's a look at mainland Alaska, and once again, the milky color that you see all the way across the Great Land, by and large, is cold air. But look, you can track the movement of the leading edge of clouds lifting northward toward the Alaska Ranges this afternoon. Cloud cover really sparse across a large chunk of the North Pacific and south of the Aleutians here. An awful lot of dry air coming in behind that initial wave of low pressure that's working across the Gulf of Alaska. But once again, cloud cover actually making its way across the Alaska Range this afternoon. A little bit of rain and snow across northern parts of southeast, and you're about to get some more as that works its way into the Panhandle later on tonight and certainly tomorrow. In the meantime, it's just plain cold. Let's take a look at the weather setup. High pressure sitting across the Yukon right now, driving in that cold and dense air from places like Eagle and Fort Yukon, some of the coldest temperatures we saw in the state today. Some pockets of snow being reported. Chances are there's just ice fog there out around the Yukon Valley this afternoon. And at parts of northern sections of southeast, we're seeing some light snow around in the Haines and Skagway areas, Chilkat valleys it look like. Southern sections of the Kenai Peninsula, we're starting to see some snow work up on the radar. Hadn't actually seen any reports there in the ground stations just yet, but it looked like it was showing up on the radar, so went ahead and colored that in for you. Around southwestern Alaska, snow there all the way from Cape Newingham eastward into Bristol Bay, and some rain on the south side around Kodiak Island. As a frontal boundary was lifting northward, we were also seeing some snow around the Pribilof Islands. As we head into tonight, chances are this front is really going to start to fall apart. The main focus for that storm itself will be across the Gulf. We'll still have some impacts from the residual boundary working its way northward, so snow still possible across southwestern Alaska, and south central Alaska will begin to see snow, including the Kenai Peninsula, Anchorage, Hillside, all the way up into the Mat-Su valleys and Susitna valleys. Southeast looking at more of a direct southerly flow. That's going to bring some warmer air to your region. So while you may start out seeing snow in Juneau and places in the surrounding area, that snow level should begin to climb, and by tomorrow it could be as high as 1,000 feet. So chances are you're looking at kind of a rain-snow mix in the region, at least to start, becoming all rain perhaps for many more places in southeast as we go through the day tomorrow. However, with the low park just to your west, there's going to be some stronger winds in the region. So while it may be warm enough for rain at the surface, if you're looking to do some flying tomorrow, chances are you may have some obscurations and probably looking at pretty choppy conditions there across the region with some wind shear, at least reaching moderate level and perhaps even some isolated severe. So just keep an eye on that, and we'll talk about that more in the turbulence forecast here in a few minutes. Out across south and west Alaska, some pockets of snow there. Rain and snow possible around Kodiak Island tomorrow, and snow and warm enough air to support enough moisture to support snow over some of the coldest spots of the country as we head into tomorrow. So Fairbanks, you might be looking at some accumulating snow there. And then here's our healthy low out across the west. We were just looking at that. That's down to about 952 millibars. The leading edge of that, though, is the occlusion, and as that marches west, or eastward, I should say, into the western Aleutians, that may bring some stronger winds across Kiska and Attu. So watch for that in the marine areas there in a little bit. For Sunday, the low continues to advance that trough a little bit further eastward. Again, the focus for that will probably reform a little bit across the North Pacific. We still have a low in the western Gulf and a frontal boundary lingering across the Gulf Coast all the way into southeast. Again, trapping a little bit more colder air perhaps around places like Juneau, maybe down toward Petersburg with some rain and snow, and then rain continues for areas around Ketchikan and Annette. A lot of the snow, it looks like, across the interior will probably fall apart by the end of the weekend. You may keep some of the clouds, so the bulk of that cold air may not just return instantly for you. There may still be some showers of snow around the lower and mid-Yukon Valley and parts of Bristol Bay and the Pribilofs, looking at an opportunity for some rain and snow showers there. Afternoon temperatures, well, the warmth was not necessarily focused on southeast entirely today. 30s and 40s for many areas around Skagway and Haines. Temperatures were working out of the teens. 30 in Yakutat, 30 as well around Juneau, 42 in Sitka, and 30s and 40s for the southern parts of southeast around the Dixon entrance. 39 for the birds in Middleton Island, 27 around Cordova. Temps were in the teens for Valdez, 20s around Whittier, all the way to Seward and Homer, 10 in Kenai, 9 in Anchorage, 3 around Wasilla. And once you climb up out of the cold, it was 11 in Talkeetna, 29 below around Healy. Greeley was even milder still, and then back into the cold you went as you head toward Fairbanks at 32 below. 49 below in Eagle, not quite as bad as it was yesterday, but you know, it's probably after 40 degrees is just plain old cold, isn't it? 53 below in Fort Yukon. That was the coldest temperature we could find at 4 o'clock. Across the Arctic coast, most areas were anywhere from 20 to 25 below. Kaktovik was showing 25 below, 20 below in Barrow. Wainwright, 21 below. Around Kotzebue Sound, we saw temperatures there anywhere from 15 to about 30 below in a few cases there around Red Devil Mine. 1 above in Nome. Unalakleet was about 4 below. McGrath 38 below. So some of the cold was working its way into your area of the upper Kuskokwim Valley. Galena again showing 42 below. Huslia not terribly comfortable there. 7 below in Bethel. Around Cape Newlingham, temperatures were on the positive side of zero at 28. Bristol Bay readings anywhere from 27 to 34 degrees between Dillingham and King Salmon, 40 in Kodiak. The Pribilofs were looking at temps at or just below the freezing point. Most of the peninsula was in the lower to mid 40s. Dutch Harbor 45, the warm spot we found, and temps hovering on either side of 40 degrees for Adak and Atka. Overnight low temperatures for the chain, likely hovering in the mid to upper 30s. Southwestern temps in the teens and 20s. North of the Kuskokwim and Yukon valleys, temperatures go sub-zero once again, but the coldest remains for Fort Yukon, Eagle, and Northway, with readings there between 35 and maybe 50 below. The Arctic coast between 25 and 35 below, again with a little bit of a wind chill. On top of that, that gets a little more painful. Around McGrath, 20 below. Galena, 30 below. South central temperatures probably hover in the single digits to low teens. Kodiak looking at 31. And southeast expect temps in the mid to upper 30s, maybe even 40 degrees down around Heidelberg. High temperatures tomorrow will be moderating upwards as well for the interior. Not quite zero, but maybe 5 to 10 below. That's a considerably milder than what you've seen for the last couple days this week. A low to mid-20s for a large part of South Central and Talkeetna, 25. Prince William Sound in the 20s and 30s. 35 in Kodiak, with the chain looking at highs approaching 40 degrees in many cases. St. Paul 31, Nunivak Island 8, Southeast 30s and 40s. Sitka once again in the lower 40s, probably near 42. Nome about 4 below, and St. Lawrence Island at 12 above, showing some of that warmth making its way your way. Flying weather now, MVFR conditions for a large part of Southeast and the Gulf Coast, really all the way around the Horn. For Kodiak Island, again, MVFR conditions prevail there. IFR conditions likely during the daytime in Prince William Sound, along parts of the Alaska Range and in the Yukon Valley, and also across parts of Southwest, and also focusing around the trough that we see approaching from the west and along the Arctic slope. Pass conditions then, Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass are expected to remain VFR at this point. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass for your Saturday may see some improvements during the day after starting out at IFR. Rainy Pass may trend toward instrument flight roll. Same goes for Windy Pass after starting out at VFR, so watch out if you see some clouds rolling in. Isabel Pass, VFR trending toward IFR conditions. Mentasta Pass may see some improvements during your Saturday afternoon. And Tanita Pass may lean over toward MVFR conditions during your Saturday. Portage Pass, we expect to see IFR conditions, especially on the eastern side there. And Chilkoot and White Pass we expect to see remaining at marginal restrictions. Freezing levels, well, the surface freezing line has not budged very much in the last couple of days, but you can see a new surge of warmer air working its way into the central and eastern Gulf. That will supply the rain and snow again to south and east and a large part of the south central coastline at very least. But very little changes there across the interior or southeast at this point, with a 2,000-foot freezing line running right over southeastern Alaska, Kodiak Island, and the Alaska Peninsula. Here's a look at icing potential. We're going to see another layer of icing probably above 3,000 feet but below 8,000 feet. That pretty much is a rule all the way around the Horn into southwestern Alaska. Another pocket of that focusing on the low pressure wave that's working its way into the Gulf as we head through the next 24 to 36 hours. The jet stream still has that high pressure right across the Arctic Ocean, which is blocking that big storm we see in the west on the satellite picture and sending that warmth and cloud cover northward. But the opposite of that is the cold air dropping southward into the lower 48, and it really starts to pick up some speed as it does that up to 120 knots. We also have a very pronounced trough here across the North Pacific and the west coast of Alaska. That is allowing that southerly flow to return thanks to high pressure sitting west of California. So some faster winds here across the upper levels of the Gulf. That's pushing that moisture into southeast and keeping the storm focus mainly out and away from south and western Alaska, but giving ample speed and energy to the storms we see across northern parts of southeast in the last couple days and again this weekend. 9,000 feet. Low pressure is parked off the Chukchi Seacoast, and that is bringing an onshore flow to the YK Delta and Norton Sound. Look for low pressure here also across the central and eastern Gulf, with wind speeds a little bit stronger there across the southern half, between 40 and 60 knots or so. Broad southwesterly flow over the Queen Charlotte and Haida Gwaii region. High pressure sitting across the central Aleutians is trying to block that next storm. We'll see how long it can be effective, but a broad southerly flow into the Kamchatka Peninsula and eastern Asia continues. At 3,000 feet, you'll notice a very similar pattern. Wind speeds, of course, will be a little bit different. Across the interior, light winds at 3,000 feet, 10 to 20 knots or so. A little bit faster on the north end of the Brooks Range as it comes across the open water. It picks up a little bit more at 35 knots. South and westerly flow into Haida Gwaii and the Dixon Entrance. Wind speeds coming in from the south and east across southeastern Alaska. We've got an offshore flow blowing over Kodiak Island, Shelikof Strait, and Prince William Sound. But very near to that is an onshore flow coming in from the south. So don't be surprised to run into some turbulence, chop there across the western Alaska Range and perhaps even south and western Alaska. Winds are fairly light still coming off of high pressure over the Yukon and parts of British Columbia. Here's a look at turbulence now, and as we were talking about, southeast could be a focus for some problems tomorrow. At least some occasional moderate turbulence there and maybe some isolated severe. We did have some reports of that earlier today. Along with this storm system that's moving across. So below 5,000 feet is where I would watch for at least some of that to crop up. Just be mindful of changing conditions there in southeast tomorrow. Around Prince William Sound, light to isolated moderate possible. That also includes Kenai Peninsula, the Cook Inlet, and maybe down to Kodiak Island. Below 8,000 feet and above 2,000 feet for some faster moving air right over the Alaska Peninsula, and some of the winds draining away from the cold and picking up speed and changing directions there across the Kuskokwim Valley and into the Yukon might produce some light to isolated moderate as well. And of course, with the broad area of low pressure moving in from the west, if you're traveling anywhere out around Attu or west of Kiska, you can probably expect at least a little bit of chop with that, and maybe even more as the day goes through and that picks up speed. A sneak peek at the ice edge shows shore-fast ice up and down the YK Delta and through the Cook Inlet here. You can always get the latest ice conditions anytime by heading to our website at weather.gov/Anchorage and look for the ice desk link on the left-hand side of your screen. We'll be back in just a few minutes with a look at your marine forecast. Stay tuned.
Good evening, I'm Harry Keeling, and on behalf of the Alaskan Aviation Safety Foundation and Alaska Public Media, welcome to Hangar Flying. The last time we got together, our guest was Dr. Petra Illig, Senior Aviation Medical Examiner. Petra's been in Alaska since 2001, owns her own medical clinic where, in fact, many of us get our flight physicals. Petra, welcome back.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
We were talking about having a series of shows, and last time you talked about why we have flight physicals, the role of the AME, and role of the pilot. But tonight, I'd like to talk about some of the common ailments or conditions that can impact flight physical status. So what are the most common conditions that can lead to grounding?
Well, pilots are just a subset of the general population. And so their medical conditions are reflective of those medical conditions that you find commonly in the general population. And of course, our population base is aging. So the most common conditions that we encounter with pilots are coronary artery disease, other vascular disorders, hypertension, diabetes, alcoholism and drug abuse, and certain, psychological conditions. Of course, cancers as well. But I would say cardiovascular blood vessel disorders are probably the most common ones I face, either with simple treatment of hypertension or following intervention for coronary artery disease, like if a person is on the verge of having a heart attack or having had a heart attack. And so it's just reflective of what we find in our population in general.
Petra, can you talk a little bit about permanent grounding versus temporary grounding versus
Sure.
how a pilot gets back onto flight status?
Sure. There are very, very few conditions that are permanently grounding, and I think even the reasonable man in the street would understand. People who are afflicted with epilepsy, for example, which is seizure disorder, whether it's well controlled with medications or not, is permanently grounding at least for 10 years until the seizure disorder is cured. Most of them aren't curable. Some are with surgery, but if they're not curable, then they will be permanently grounded, simply because having a seizure during flight is not a good thing. Certain kinds of severe psychiatric illnesses, schizophrenia, for example, are permanently disgrounding. But most conditions, even if they're initially grounding, like having had a heart attack, like having had a stroke, like having had certain kinds of cancers, really in essence, if that medical condition is stabilized with approved medications, the person can return back to flight under an authorization called special issuance. Special issuance is a category where the individual's certificate is restricted to a certain length of time, shorter than the normal expiration date of medical certification, so that the treating physician can provide records to document ongoing stability. Then there's a whole new category of conditions AMEs can issue that are more of the common variety ones: hypothyroid disease or hypothyroidism, high blood pressure, certain kinds of cancers that actually do not require review by the FAA anymore, which is a wonderful thing, but it does require the appropriate documentation that the AME needs to review and then make sure that it meets the FAA's criteria. So that's very exciting.
So let's take a hypothetical case where someone had a heart problem and they got a stent or stents. How long would that process tend to last before they could, assuming everything went well?
Well, actually, up until recently, it was 6 months from the time that the event occurred or the surgical intervention occurred, and now it's 3 months.
Oh.
So, which is also very exciting, which also brings to the point that these criteria and these specifications change over time as the medical community and the FAA gets increasing comfort with certain types of treatments and intervention, then the FAA will also shift their positions from being more conservative to more moderate. And so it's a constant, re-evaluating the guidelines on the FAA's part.
This is maybe a question that we're going to have to take over till the next time. But one of the things you and I talked about, which is very concerning, is you have pilots who are so afraid of sharing a problem with you, they might actually risk very serious complications, even death.
Oh, I have no doubt. I mean, I've had pilots tell me retrospectively, after they've developed a comfort level, that we're here actually there to help them, that in the past that they'd done exactly that. And certainly we know pilots will frequently deny themselves ongoing proper care because they're afraid that if they get placed on a medication or get evaluated for prostate cancer or whatever, that they might lose their certification. And it's just not true. If you get your physical health taken care of and properly managed, then the medical certification will almost always follow through with you.
Great. Petra, thanks for being on the show tonight.
You're very welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, Petra's going to come back again next time, and we're going to talk a little bit about the other side, and that is what choices you can make as pilots for a more healthy lifestyle and may in fact avoid some of these problems. So until then, till next time, fly safe.
Thank you, Harry, and Happy New Year to you, sir. Looking at southeast for the marine weather, you notice the winds in the inner channels are a little bit stronger than normal. A northerly flow at 25 knots with 3 to 5 foot seas in the north. East and southeasterly flow building in at 25 knots with 5 to 7 foot seas across the inner channels there, and a broad southeasterly flow running up the coastal areas around 35 knots, 11 to 14 foot seas around Yakutat, 16 foot seas outside of Gustavus and north of Sitka, and 13 to 14 foot seas in some of the southern zones. That becomes an onshore flow as we get into Sunday there, with 15 to 20 knot winds in the north, 25 knot winds in the south, and for the inner channels, a broad southeasterly flow coming up with a northerly flow continuing around the Lynn Canal at 20 knots with a 4-foot sea, all due to that frontal system working through southeast over the weekend. Now on the back side of that, we have northerlies coming down the Cook Inlet through Shelikof Strait, northwesterly flow sneaking out of the Cook Inlet into the western Gulf and running into northeasterly flow around Prince William Sound, and on the northern end, those winds could be as strong as 30 knots with 11-foot seas. Once we get into Sunday, you'll notice the winds still around 10 to 20 knots or so across the Cook Inlet and Shelikof Strait. Easterlies still blowing into the eastern side of Kenai Peninsula and Seward, 15 to 20 knots with a northeasterly flow inside Prince William Sound with a 3-foot sea, 9-foot seas on the outside, and 10-foot seas east of Kodiak Island with a 25-knot wind coming into the island itself from the east. Across the Alaska Peninsula on Saturday, a broad southeasterly flow around 20 knots or so around the Bering Sea side. 4-foot seas are expected, 15 to 16-foot seas on the Pacific side. By Sunday, the winds are shifting ever so slightly, still about the same speed, 15 to 25 knots or so. Easterlies inside Bristol Bay with a 4-foot sea, and 8 to 9-foot seas continue across the northern Pacific, running into the Alaska Peninsula again from the east and southeast. Across the Aleutians now, look at the west. You'll notice the impacts already from that frontal structure working its way closer to the Aleutians. Southeasterlies picking up very quickly to 30 to 45 knots. 9 to 15-foot seas there building up throughout the day. On the central and eastern Aleutian side, you'll notice a variable flow, if not a northerly flow coming across, so obviously much colder there in the backside of the current wave. A southeasterly flow coming into the south side of the eastern Aleutians, and northerlies making it through south of Nikolsky, 11 to 12-foot seas there in the east, and as high as 6 to 10-foot seas there in the central and eastern islands. By Sunday, we already see one wave working its way through the western and central Aleutians there, 25 to 35 knot winds, 17 to 22-foot seas in the west, and southeasterly flow here with 6 to 7-foot seas in the north on the Bering Sea side, 9 to 13-foot seas on the south side with a westerly flow south of Adak and Eka already at 35 knots. Across the west, a northeasterly wind coming off the continent and out of Norton Sound. That'll give us 25 to 30 knot winds there around St. Lawrence Island, already experiencing ice through most of the zone. 7 to 9-foot seas there around the St. Matthew Island waters, and east and northeasterly winds out of Kuskokwim Bay into the Pribilofs with a 5 to 9-foot sea. Freezing spray is going to be an issue here pretty much all weekend long, it looks like. Southeasterlies will work their way northward toward the south side of Nunivak Island. Freezing spray continues around the St. Matthew Island waters north of Nunivak Island and for the Pribilofs, it looks like, with a 25 to 30 knot wind in the north. 25 knot winds, though, from the north and east over St. Lawrence Island will continue to drop the cold farther and farther south. Through Saturday across the Arctic coast, look for 15 to 25 knot winds there. Broad easterly flow sweeping across will also present dangerous wind chills to the coastal areas there. Those valleys could drop to 50 to 55 below. A northeasterly flow rounding Cape Lisburne and Point Hope. A northerly flow coming through Kotzebue Sound and reaching the northern shores of the Seward Peninsula. 15 knot wind there. That drops off to about 10 knots as we get into Sunday. Light easterlies coming off of Cape Lisburne and Point Lay. Easterlies continue at 15 to 20 knots as you approach Barrow and Wainwright. And easterlies are a little bit stronger here, 25 to 30 knot winds north of Prudhoe Bay and Kaktovik as we continue the weekend. So the wind chill values again, obviously a little bit lower as you head a little bit further east. Recapping tonight's weather around your state, high pressure sits across the Yukon at 1,041 millibars. The mitigating factor for the interior over the course of the weekend will be more clouds, slightly more warming. Again, it's all a perspective thing, I'm sure. But you'll notice that more clouds and more moisture is working its way into the region, so the temperature should be moderating upwards ever so slightly in some cases, or perhaps a lot, depending on where you are. Notice the frontal boundary sitting across southeast. That will focus rain and snow across some of the northern areas, but the snow level should be climbing. In Juneau over the weekend, it might rise to about 1,000 feet by sometime on Saturday. Southeasterlies will also bring in a chance for snow for south central Alaska coming as soon as tonight and continuing through the daytime tomorrow. Rain and snow in parts of Kodiak with a wave approaching southeast, some stronger winds, and waves should be expected around southeast as we start up Saturday. Another frontal boundary working in from the west and reaching over the Aleutians Saturday and into Sunday will bring some stronger winds and waves to the western chain. And snow continues for parts of south and western Alaska with a new storm working its way into the western Gulf by Sunday afternoon. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder. Happy New Year, and thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.